Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this information session in relation to T2A or transition to adulthood. Apologies, we've had some technical issues this morning, so hopefully they don't plague us throughout this. Before we go any further, I really want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting from today in our respective locations and pay my respects to elders past, present, and also emerging. A really brief bit of information about me. So my name's Danny Hemsley. I've been a case officer with Queensland Foster and Kinship Care for just over 8 years. Prior to that was a CSO on the north side of Brisbane for 6.5 years. And that's really where my interest in T2A, as it's known as now, really began. There was a lot of times where, particularly towards the end of my time at the department, Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for letting me know the mic was off there. We've had some technical issues this morning, so hopefully that's the last of them. I'll start just at the very beginning, just for anyone that may have missed what I was saying there. So, look, thank you for taking time out of your day to attend the Transition to Adulthood T2A training. This is very much an introduction to T2A. Before we go any further, I would really like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting from today in our respective locations, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and also emerging. A really brief bit of information about me. So my name's Danny Hemsley. I've been a case officer with Queensland Foster and Kinship Care for just over 8 years now. And prior to that was a CSO on the north side of Brisbane. And certainly my time within the department, particularly toward the end of that time, was a really great opportunity for me to see some of the work that was being done in relation to T2A. And, you know, there were some absolutely great pieces of work being done there, but also upon reflection, some areas where, you know, there could have been some improvements or enhancements to what was going on. And I think that really began my curiosity in this area to find out more about T2A. And also, as part of that, really the desire to contribute to it. I'm just getting some comments that people can't hear me. Hopefully it's coming okay through for most people. This will go online at the end of this for those that can't hear. Just getting a few comments around that. Excellent. Some can hear me. That's great. Apologies for those that can't. There might be some issues that you've got at your end. If you can't hear, we'll try and figure out what's gone on at the end of this webinar. This will go online, as I say, so anything that's missed, you'll be able to you know, look at afterwards if you can't hear for any particular reason at any point. Just going through, there are some housekeeping things for us to go through. Obviously, I can't see or hear you. The microphones and cameras are switched off. Hopefully most of you can see me and most of you can hear me. I know some apparently cannot at the moment. We do have a chat tab there. So at the end of this webinar, we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the very end for any questions, any comments that you might have. If I don't know the answer to some of those things, I'll certainly find out and get back to you in relation to that. And then obviously we'll you know, for any particular matters, we'll address those afterwards. If you're going through this and you think, you know, I need more information about this area, or I've got a particular case that needs some involvement from QFKC, please reach out to me and contact me directly after this. This is really a general webinar kind of training session that we've got here. So anything that's particularly relevant for you or for a child that you've got in your care, please contact me directly. For the questions and comments, please keep them general, just being aware that anyone that posts there, your comments and so on will go out to the group, so everyone will be able to view those. So we'll go through into the PowerPoint itself. So that at the very beginning, we'll look at, I can just switch this one through. So this is an overview of the training. Again, it is quite a short webinar. It's about an hour or so, an hour and 15, with that time at the end for comments and questions. So this is really an overview of the training. The webinar itself is a much condensed version, as I say, of the overall training that we run around T2A. The full version includes a lot more than this. So this is very, very brief. So this one will look at a background and context of T2A, past and present, how we've got to where we are now, particularly around the name change or changes that have occurred here. That's a really quite an interesting area there where there's been some movement. the roles and responsibilities of care team members, particularly looking at the department there. There's obviously the Child Safety Practice Manual, the Child Protection Act, which guides a lot of this work. So we'll look at that mainly in regards to departmental policy, the rights of young people transitioning to adulthood, avenues of support that are available, and the carer's role in supporting young people through their transition to adulthood. So this is a quick message, guys, at this point, just to email me afterwards for anything that you think you might need. There's my email address there for anyone that would like to jot that down. Again, this will go online, so you won't miss that. Some of you will already know me anyway. But this is just to highlight that the overall training module will include a whole range of additional things, which if you can email me, will include research findings, videos and brochures that will come out, external service support websites and links, stories from young people. That's a really excellent one there. There's been some work that's been done by the Create Foundation, which is a body that really promote the views and wishes and voices of young people. So they've got some stories on their website around some employment achievements and also other achievements that young people have gained through tertiary education and so on. Really some great stuff there on their website, and also some tools and templates that can come out as well. So in terms of transition to adulthood, it's come on quite a journey, just in terms of the name itself. Most of you that have been in the sector for quite some time, you'll know that transition from care was a term that was in existence for quite some time prior to this changing. It was very much an active change that was fueled quite heavily by the Create Foundation, where they looked at the voices of young consultants, which are young people that have had a care journey around. And what should this be changed? Should there be a different term that we now use when we're talking about transitioning to adulthood? And the view was absolutely, we need it to be something different. One of the things that we found with transition from care when talking to young people is that there was an emphasis around, if you're transitioning from care, does that then mean that you're transitioning from the carer? And a lot of young people said, yes, that's kind of what they were made to feel, is that they were transitioning from care, and so transitioning from the carer was in some ways automatically in their thinking as part of that. So it was really important to look at, well, if that's the case, do we need to then change that term? Some of the work that I did with Create some years ago now was around a module of training called It's Okay to Stay, which was to counter some of the, I guess, the points that were kind of viewed in relation to TFC about, well, if we're transitioning from care and we're transitioning from the carer, do those things go hand in hand? So that training was about getting rid of some of those notions about, no, actually, you don't need to leave the carer. That's not the case. And really, having a conversation with carers about making sure that young people don't have a view of, am I leaving when I turn 18? It's really important to have those conversations with young people prior to the age of 18, well before that, about having a plan about what happens for you in terms of where you're going to be living when you turn 18. And I think that term there was quite confronting for young people, where there was that confusion about, if I'm transitioning from care, am I transitioning from the carer? So that piece of work that I did with Create that time ago was to really try and remove some of the views around that, or the misunderstanding in relation to it. And that then led to T2A, which was transition to independence. But the view around that, which came in recently, was around, well, independence is, it can be quite ambiguous. It can be subjectively, quite difficult to interpret what that actually means. And so there was another conversation that occurred with young consultants and other peak bodies, other agencies throughout the state in relation to, well, should we change the name again? And then it became T2A, which young consultants were much more, I think, agreeable to. I think adulthood is easier to define than probably independence is. And I think for me, one of the really interesting points around this was, where you've got TFC, it's about moving from something, whereas T2I and T2A is moving towards something as opposed to away from it. And I think if you're moving towards something, it's easier then to see what the goal is. If you're moving away from something, it's like it's then about, well, where to from here? So I think T2A and T2I previously were both of the view that we needed to look at where we're going, not just where we've come from. So I think that name change certainly now at this point does reflect that quite well. And I wouldn't imagine there to be a change anytime soon. I think young consultants were quite happy with that name change. So T2A, in a broad sense, and this is going back to the full version of this, when we're looking at anyone's experience as you go through adolescence into adulthood, there's going to be a lot of challenges and a lot of major events and experiences that really mark that time. And I think going back for me at the age of 18, I was still living in the UK at that point. There was so much going on for me at that time. And I think, I just think now, well, if you've got young people that have got all these additional challenges, I just think, how on earth could you navigate through that process? And there's so many things that are integral to that process working well. And that's really the notion of what I want to cover off today through this information session. So what steps are involved and who does what? So case planning is really a key area for this. So the CSO, the Child Safety Officer, the young person, carer, family, residential workers, family participation program. There could be a whole range of different people that are going to be making up essentially the care team for a young person that's going through this process. And it should, of course, involve anyone else that the young person identifies. I think going back to my point before about some of the things that were picked up in my early work with the department toward the end of my time there was that there were some young people that weren't really being involved in the process as much as they should have been. And it's such an obvious thing to say, but it can be quite difficult where you've got a lot of young people that have had all these different agencies working with them throughout their time in care. It can be quite easy to think, well, the professionals provide all the information, but we miss out sometimes on including the young people as part of that. So certainly where they're able to, they should be heavily involved in that process, and they should also be involved in the selection of who's involved with them as part of that process. So it might include birth family members, it could include a supportive teacher, an older sibling, best friend, etc. It could be quite broad in terms of that, but it's important that there's a conversation about making sure that if we've got a young person that's going through the process, who do they believe is going to be able to advocate for them outside of what we might view as being a typical care team setup or format with those that are already involved and have been involved with the young person probably for quite some time. The T2A plan is part of a young person's case plan, so that's important to bear in mind as well. If you're viewing a case plan for a young person aged 15 onwards, there should really be a completely comprehensive element to that, which is about the transition plan that's going to be there for that young person. It should be starting at the age of 15 formally. It may even begin slightly prior to that in a less formal way, but we'll go through that a little bit later on as well in terms of the ages. And for support services and their involvement, the age factor is quite relevant there as well. So we'll cover off on that as well as we go through it. And of course, the CSO, the Child Safety Officer, should discuss this with the young person and with you as the carer. I know we've got departmental workers, agency workers and carers today. A lot of this is angled specifically at carers, but certainly for departmental staff and agency staff, there's a huge role for you as well as part of the process for T2A. So what does departmental policy say? So I'm reviewing this recently, and this will actually be reviewed again next year. I think some recent changes will feature in the update that occurs for this, but the Department of Child Safety or Children, Youth Justice, Multicultural Affairs, as it is currently, is committed to safety, belonging and wellbeing of young people throughout their transition to adulthood, and child safety will support young people who are in the Chief Executive's custody or guardianship to transition from care into adulthood, and support young people aged 15 to 25 who have been in the Chief Executive custody or guardianship to successfully transition into independent adulthood. Just looking at the name there for child safety, sometimes I struggle to keep up with the name changes, but certainly at the moment that's what we've got. I just wanted to make sure of that when reading it again. So they're kind of two of the key points there when looking at the policy. And the next slide really goes into the areas of the policy which are very, very specific, and we'll talk about that now. So looking at the point at the beginning about the content of this, it looks at the roles and responsibilities. So within the policy, it actually talks to the planning process and what that needs to include. So it needs to be an informed process that includes joint planning with the young person and participants nominated by them to address and identify their developmental needs for transitioning to adulthood. We spoke about that before, about the importance of young people being included in the process. And it's so crucial that where possible that takes place. It's developed through the development, implementation and regular review of the young person's case plan. We spoke about that a moment ago as well, about that case plan being reviewed and the importance of that occurring. It responds to key life events of relationships, connections, cultural and personal identity, placements and housing, education and training, employment, health, life skills, and financial resources. All of the points that are covered off within the full module of training actually go into those areas individually and look at each of them. We cover them more broadly within this, but they're certainly crucial areas for young people when looking at their transition. All of those areas are very, very important. It takes into account the young person's level of maturity and development, building upon their personal strengths, goals, and needs. It aims to provide or engage appropriate services and supports in a timely manner. That timely manner element is crucial for young people. Obviously, if you're working with a young person at the age of 15, you don't have a huge amount of time to really start this process and get the ball rolling. So that timely manner is so important. And going into number 6, recognizing that leaving care and transitioning to adulthood is an ongoing process, and it must be gradual, flexible, and aimed at maintaining and building strong and supported emotional relationships and physical connections for community. You can see that between 6 and 7, you've got, or 5 and 6 specifically, you've got reference there to it being done in a timely manner, but then 6 refers to it being a gradual process as well. So it is a bit of a balancing act there about how do we do this in a way that is timely, but also not doing it too gradually that we end up slowing things down too much. We need it to continue going at a reasonably good pace, but we don't want to miss anything either. So it really is a bit of a balancing act there around number 5 and 6 and making sure that those two things are compatible with one another. Number 7 is gains clarity and intensity by age 17 to coincide with the planned exit from care at the age of 18. Crucially, at 17, there's going to be so much work being done at that point, and there have been some recent changes that have occurred in relation to T2A, which I'll get to in a moment. Number 8 continues after the age of 18 if required, where support is to meet any outstanding case plan goals through the delivery of support service casework and planning. That one there's been this one's a fairly recent change. I think most people will probably be aware of this now, but maybe not, so I'll mention it anyway, is that an approved carer, where they've got a young person in their care when they turn 18, that carer will still receive the fortnightly caring allowance for that young person up until the point at which they turn 19, regardless of educational status. So that's a really important, and that was done specifically for the journey through to adulthood. That was specifically there in relation to that, which is a really important change. And there's another one which I'll mention shortly. Number 9 is that it promotes ongoing connection to family, community, and culture as appropriate in the circumstances. And number 10 is that recognizing that help is available to assist the young person to the point at which they transition to adulthood. And obviously the age there referenced is until the point at which they turn 25. You'll see that a lot of the emphasis, certainly from the department in previous times, has been around the age of 18. Once that age hits, it's really about then looking at what community-based support organisations are out there or what can be accessed by a young person until they turn 25. And we'll look at TILA, which is transitioning to basically the living allowance, and that's from 15 to 25. So that 25 age is certainly relevant for that. And it's also relevant for Next Step Plus, which some of you will be aware of as well, which can also be included up until the young person turns 25. One of the really important changes that's occurred in this space, only in recent weeks really, has been around Homestretch, or the initiative of Homestretch, which some of you may be aware of. This was an initiative which was really about how can we support young people in care post 18 in a really proactive way, and how can we have the department work alongside all the other agencies that have been advocating for that to make that possible. So a recent change in Queensland, there were only 2 in looking at the states or jurisdictions, the only 2 that hadn't really looked at this were Queensland and New South Wales. So this has now been adopted in Queensland, whereby the department will provide support up until a young person turns 21. We don't know a huge amount about how that's going to look yet because it's so recent. And the very last Homestretch meeting that will occur will be in the next few weeks. So I'm sure there'll be a lot more clarified from that. Looking at some recent material that's gone out, there certainly is an emphasis on tertiary education, accommodation, and employment. And I've also seen that there is a $200,000 amount that's been allocated by government for this financial year, given that we're just now into this new financial year, where there'll be forums set up for young people to talk about what they view are the priority areas for support up until the age of 21. So that's a really huge initiative that's come out of Homestretch that they were advocating for, which has now come into play in Queensland. So New South Wales, to my knowledge, is the only one at this point that doesn't really have that. So the department will be much more actively involved with young people until the age of 21 moving forward. So that's a really huge change and development in Queensland. And I think as time goes by, we'll find out more about that. And as we do, we'll put that out on social media and so on to ensure that people are aware of that. But a really huge change there in relation to that. So transitioning to adulthood is a process, not an event. That really is the crux of what we spoke about before. It's much more, of course, than a young person transitioning to adulthood or turning 18 and receiving an exit package at that point. There's a huge amount of work that goes into it prior to that. And really, now with that 21 age group, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in this space. I imagine that the policy for child safety being reviewed in 2023 will end up including a range of different things that will feed into that a bit more. So we'll probably find out a lot more over time, but I imagine there'll be a lot of change in this area, which is great. And probably a disclaimer at this point as well means that for some of the content that we have within this introduction module and our overall module for T2A, the much broader module, there'll probably be quite a lot of changes in relation to it as well to make sure that we're including that information. So really, it's about supporting young people to grow from adolescence to adulthood. It's about meeting their developmental milestones and learning new skills and the ability to access necessary supports to live in their community. And these are the principles which really guide the rights of young people. When looking through these, and I'll go through them in a moment, really the two things that stood out for me when looking at this were about the involvement of young people specifically and the reference to culture and community. Those two areas, or three areas really, are so heavily featured, as they need to be, in the principles that guide the rights for young people. And all of them really, as we go through, you'll see they kind of really spell that out in a way that's very, very clear throughout each of these. So looking at the first, it's talking about the safety, well-being and best interests of a child throughout their childhood and the rest of their life, really. That's paramount. That's number one there. Very, very broad as a principle. But as they go through, they become more and more specific. And of course, it's to ensure that there's flexibility there, because what that means for young people is going to differ depending on the child and what their needs are. Child safety staff will act in a way that makes decisions compatible with human rights and obligations under the Human Rights Act 2019. So obviously now with that coming in, that features directly in relation to that. Young people will be active participants in the development, implementation and review of their goals and aspirations in preparation for leaving care and planning for their future. So again, their involvement is very, very clear at the beginning of this. Transition planning needs to be holistic, inclusive and collaborative. It must include, where possible, the young person. Again, we go back to that point before. People of importance to the young person and people that they identify as being crucial to support them in terms of their move towards adulthood. Young people are entitled to be connected to appropriate support services and assisted to maintain social, community and cultural networks. We talk more about some of the services that are available for young people a little bit later on. It is, again, quite broad, though. The more specific information, if you email me after this, there'll be a lot more that comes out in relation to that. Young people have a right to receive information about their personal history. There'll be some information that we'll get to shortly around that as well. Young people will be supported to safely connect with their family and community. And this one, the next one is crucial. This is what we look at within assessment work for panel throughout QFKC, is the 5 core elements of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child placement principle. A really crucial piece of work that's been done to ensure that is covered off around those 5 areas of prevention, partnership, placement, participation and connection. And that's within the Child Protection Act. Maintaining and strengthening the cultural identity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people is integral to their preparation for leaving care. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people have a right to be supported to develop and maintain connections with family, community, culture, traditions and language. So again, you can see that culture and also the inclusion of young people, really, they guide the vast majority of those principles. Really, really important for young people to be aware that as they go through this process, there's going to be so many questions that they come across. And these areas are designed to ensure that if planning for a young person is going astray anywhere, that these things will then get it back on track. So who does what? We've kind of talked about this a little bit already. Certainly it should be pretty well understood that it's an ongoing process, not a one-off event or even a series of events. And central to that is the young person. So whatever is being done, it must include them where possible. And it's going to be much more likely. This is going back to some of the research findings from CREATE. They found that where young people are involved in the process, the outcomes for young people are much more positive as a result of that. So a really crucial kind of takeaway point there in relation to any T2A work being done. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we include this in a lot of our training at QFKC. Really, the purpose of including this is to provide really a visual representation of what we're referring to. So in terms of how we can actually apply the hierarchy, you could imagine there that where you've got young people that are going through a lot of complexities and challenges associated with their time in care, or things that have gone on that have led to them being in care, whatever it is, there may be some concerns that exist around their physiological needs, safety needs, loving and belonging, and obviously their sense of self-esteem. As they're going through transition, and we're looking at accommodation, education, employment, all these additional things that they've got to then consider. If their safety and physiological needs are not being met, they're not going to be able to progress up that pyramid. For those of you that have gone through and had a look at this, the pyramid's been added to. I think there's 2 or 3 more additional areas now that can be added to that. But certainly in its simplest form, what we're getting at there is that for young people, if they haven't been able to have their physiological and safety needs met, it's going to be very, very hard to then work to the point where they're going to be able to reach their potential, because they're so focused on making sure their basic care needs are being met that they're not then going to be able to look at these additional pursuits that are going to be really required of them as they get older, in terms of how they gain employment, how they're avoiding homelessness and so on. So that's a really important thing to kind of show, even from Abraham Maslow, which is going back many, many years now, that hierarchy of needs is still very, very relevant and still very much applies. So the carer role unpacked a little bit more than what we've already gone through. So child safety works with young people to help them transition from care to live as independent adults. Planning for transition from care begins when a young person turns 15. We spoke about that age of 15 before, and it provides an opportunity for young people to identify their goals and needs for their future. So this is really angled at carers, as it mentions there at the beginning. So because of the unique relationship that carers will have with the young people in their care, there's certainly a critical role that they have then in preparing and supporting young people to transition successfully to adulthood. So there's lots of ways that you can help a young person become more independent. These are just some of those ways. So deciding what they will do when they finish school, that's a really important one. Certainly keeps them very much directed in terms of what they might want to do regarding employment, which then goes to the next, which is about finding casual work, developing their budgeting or cooking skills, helping get their driver's license, find out more about reasons why they came into care in the first place. Again, I'll speak to that in a little bit more detail as we go through. There's a slide a little bit later on which gets to that. Learning more about their health and lifestyle choices, and exploring their culture or spiritual beliefs. For anyone that has interest in this, or finding out ways of, because certainly some of those areas as you're going through it, you can imagine that some of the conversations that you might have with young people could be quite difficult or confronting in terms of thinking, well, how do I actually begin this conversation? How do I raise this topic? I'm not really sure how they're going to react to that. Again, please email me. There's some resources out there that really are aimed at assisting to have a conversation with young people on some of these areas, and some of the more difficult ones that you might find really beneficial as you're going through for a young person that is working through that transition journey. So please email me again around that, and I'll send out some additional resources there. So this is kind of a summary of that. So there should be consideration as early as possible to establish whether a young person can stay with you as a carer, as that provides stability. It's about having a conversation that the young person, so that they're not left, the young person doesn't want to be, I guess, assuming one way or another necessarily, but they might have views about this. That, there may have been things that they've picked up throughout their time in conversations with a carer. It may be very, very clear. That conversation may have already happened. But if it hasn't happened, it's really important that it does, because the last thing that we want is for young people to not know that they are actually okay to stay with that carer post the point at which they transition to adulthood. If that's an additional concern or a worry for a young person, having a conversation with them around that may eliminate that as a potential concern. So it's really important to not have the assumption that they know that, once they're 18, once they're transitioning, that there's a plan in place. They have to be aware of what that plan is. It might be about finding out other options in the longer term, or at least talking about allowing time for that to happen, as there needs to be consideration for young people to know how they will manage once they've transitioned. So of course, as part of that conversation, there's probably going to be a range of other things then that the young person will be aware of as you're discussing with them what the plans are for them in terms of accommodation once they turn 18, or maybe after that period. So having the conversation is the crucial message there. Using empowering practice, so by all means help teens to do tasks. You know, it could be a range of different things, helping them to cook, clean, brushing their teeth properly, it could be anything. It's important that that's shared. And as we mentioned before, don't shy away from some of the difficult topics around sex, drugs, alcohol, peer pressure, making friends. Again, there's a whole range of different things there, which, you know, you might be looking at and thinking, I'm not sure how to raise this, or, you know, I'm just concerned about how the young person's going to react. Again, please email me. Some of the resources around that are deliberately angled at trying to work through some of those barriers. If you're not sure who to talk to, I've already spoken about QFKC and certainly connecting with us. Your agency, the department, the CSO that you're working with may have a lot of information around this as well. So certainly accessing those additional areas of support is absolutely a recommendation. There's online now, there's a whole range of things that you can access that will really be quite helpful for you. And I mentioned the Create Foundation as well. Their website has a range of resources, information packs, and I'll talk to that a bit more as we go through it as well. So T2A funding. So T2A funding is available from Child Safety to support and resource a young person's approved case plan. So it should be referenced in there. It's not an exit payment upon leaving care, but is based upon the needs or the assessed needs of the young person that will be accessing the funding. And we'll look at TILA, which I mentioned a moment ago in the next slide. That funding and support, it may actually span several years and may continue for a specified period after the young person's transition. So that's an important consideration as well. And it may include a range of things such as setup costs. It may be about white goods, might be a sofa that the young person's going to need. It could be life skills. We spoke about driving lessons before, cooking classes, or employment-related activities. It can be quite broad. It is specific in that it has to be used for a set purpose around a range of areas that are relevant to the transition. But it is also quite flexible, as you can see, in terms of some of the things that it can be used for. And when we actually reviewed this module of training, we had young consultants from Create that were sitting with us to help us do it, because we thought, well, there's probably going to be things that we're going to miss. And so who better to help us with this than having young consultants that have actually had a care journey, that have the experience to go through and talk about, well, these are some of the things that you need to talk to carers about, talk to agency staff about, talk to Department of Workers about when going through and explaining some of these points. And the analogy that was used, which I just thought was amazing from this young consultant, we've actually included in here. So what they said is that it's like a mouse that has a room full of cheese. The mouse doesn't know how to keep or maintain this. It would be overwhelming for a mouse that's had too much of something all at once with no plan of how to manage what's available, but that if it's able to be stored away and accessed when it's needed, it's much more manageable. And I thought that was such a great way of explaining how this works. If the process, as we spoke about previously, is gradual, but also where support is provided in a timely manner, it's going to mean that the young person isn't overwhelmed, because the plan of going from 15 up until the point at which they transition allows for that period of time to be a manageable period. And I thought that analogy is such a great way of explaining what will happen if there's too much of something at once. And so we've kept that in there. I just thought that was really inspiring, and such a great way of explaining it from that young consultant. So TILA, this is what we referenced a moment ago. So transition to independent living allowance. So this is a one-off payment up to $1,500. There's information about this online. To be eligible to access it, the young person has to be an Australian resident. That 15 to 25 age group there again is relevant for that. It can be accessed between those ages, and it has to be approaching within 6 weeks of applying for it or experiencing an exit from care. For the young person, they have to be experiencing an exit from care, or if they've already exited care, they must have applied for this no more than 24 months prior. So there is a bit of a window there about applying for it. Again, that's online as well. So it's important that that's looked at, because the last thing that we'd want there is for a young person that's left care, they've left it 3 years, and then they're wanting to access this. And they're having some difficulties there. So it's just about making sure that that window is understood. Be subject to one or more of the risk factors for an unsuccessful exit from care. They haven't received the assistance before, have been or are currently in care, and TILA being accessed should be in joint discussion with the young person to basically discuss why it's being accessed and how it's going to be used. So this is some of the things that these are some of the things that TILA can be used for. So again, that age of 15 to 25 is really crucial to have a discussion with young people. They may already have ideas about what they're wanting to use it for or what they'll need to use it for, but these are some of the things that they can absolutely use it in relation to. It could be connection to utilities to assist in the establishment of housing. So it could be for phone, electricity, gas, moving expenses, appliances or white goods, furnishings, consumables like cleaning products, financial or other counselling that they might be needing or have requested. It could be around their education that they're continuing on with and what they need as part of that. Transport to undertake studies or employment, or it could be for simple things like bus tickets or phone cards, etc. It could be bus tickets as part of that transport to actually get to university or to and from their job and so on. So again, it is flexible, but it's also quite specific in what it's needing to be used for. And again, the information online is much more detailed in relation to TILA and some of the financial availability that's there for young people when they're transitioning, much broader than just TILA. This is one of the slides that's carried over from the much broader module of T2A. This is from a study, it's quite some time ago now, back in 2007, which was provided to us by CREATE. This was looking at where some of those challenges we spoke about before for young people exist around accommodation, in terms of their employment, in terms of their education, where they're having ongoing issues in connection to that. And also going back to the pyramid from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where those physiological and safety needs are not being met. These are some of the outcomes that they found from young people as part of this study. It was more likely that they were going to be involved in the criminal justice system, more likely that they would be unemployed, earning lower wages, experiencing homelessness, living in unstable housing conditions, be at higher risk of substance abuse, having mental health issues, being dependent on social assistance, becoming a parent at a younger age, and being undereducated. This study, and there's been many since then, have actually found that for young people just being in care, all of these are more likely to occur. So that really serves to highlight the importance of that transition plan and the inclusion of the young person as part of that, because if those things can be addressed, it's much more likely that these outcomes will be less likely. And that would be certainly the hope for me. And I think anyone working with a young person is to avoid these things from occurring and certainly reducing the likelihood of them at the very least. So relationships and connections, this is one of the areas that we kept from the overall module in relation to this, given the importance of it. So assisting young people to successfully sustain lifelong emotional relationships with adults is essential to their success or their successful transition to adulthood. And again, going back to CREATE, former young people in care have reported that they seek out relatives as well as other adults that they meet while in care for emotional connections after they've left the system. And as we know from peer groups, these relationships have an enormous impact on young people and their ability to succeed in making the difficult transition from adolescence to adulthood. These are some of the other points or ideas that you can use to work with a young person as they're going through the process. So one of them is what we call the ideal home activity, which you can use with a young person. They don't really need to necessarily be age 15 for this. It could be at really any age, but what do they imagine to be their ideal home without making judgments, of course, or determinations about what they say or what their dreams are. You know, they could have a drawing of their house, and they could kind of then, it's up to them then to really display that how they think it should be presented, what they would like that to look like as an ideal for them when they transition. And some of the other things that you can look at then are around employment. What do they want to do as a job? You know, those kind of things. It's really about opening up the conversation with a young person to ensure that they've considered some of these things. That if the conversation hasn't occurred, we can't assume that they're going to know or that they've had thoughts about these areas. So it's really important that we start to have the conversations with young people. and have a plan so that housing certainty is there early on. We spoke about that much earlier. It's really crucial that that happens at an earlier on point, not left until, they're 17, 18, thinking, what's the plan from here once I transition? And when exploring the link to support, explain how a service can help, how to engage them with that. That's a really significant component to that, is about, if brochures and someone are just handed to a young person, they're not really going to know what to do with that. Whereas if there's a conversation about explaining what a service is, how that service can help, and what potentially, or what hopefully will be gained from that, is a much more beneficial way of then engaging the young person as part of a conversation about looking at what support's going to be beneficial for them in the first place. And then they're also hopefully then more aware about what they can gain from that. I think that's a better way to go, as opposed to just handing brochures and so on. I know if that was me and I was giving brochures, they'd probably sit somewhere for a long period of time. I may not ever get back to them. Whereas if that conversation involves the young person, much more likely to be fruitful. And this is what I wanted to come to earlier. This was about how to access information for young people in care. So this is, some of you may be aware of this. This is a time in care report. And I know we're fairly short on time, guys, so I'll really just summarize this quite quickly. But there's more information online in relation to this. If you type in Google or any half-decent search engine, time in care information access service or time in care report, you'll find information about this. So if you've been in care in Queensland, you may want to seek information about your time in care. That can be done through the time in care information access service. And the information that can be included there will be about your time as a young person in care. It may include why you came into care, your placement history, information about milestones, education, medical information or records, details of family members' names, other relevant information about your family and your experiences in out-of-home care. Some documents might be provided as well, including birth certificates, school reports, medical reports, awards, and photographs. And please note there are circumstances in which information about you and other people may not be included. Obviously, for reasons of confidentiality, there may be some of that information which is simply redacted. But for more information about that, in terms of who's eligible and how to apply, again, if you type that into a search engine, time in care report or time in care information access service, it comes straight up. And again, for anyone playing this back, there's a bit more information there just about how to apply, but a really beneficial thing for young people to be aware of in terms of how to access their information. They may not know about how to do that. And of course, the other thing, which is really important, is that if there is information that's been provided to a young person, it's crucial that there's someone there with them to support them in going through that process. There might be some really difficult or confronting information within those records. So having someone there with them going through that is really crucial. So as a bit of a summary, so young people who learn life skills that address issues of self-esteem, self-determination, loyalty and loss, and how to safely relate with their relatives, as we've found from particularly from CREATE research and other research, are better able to reconcile their feelings with the past and build healthy relationships in future. Agencies and individuals that assist young people to address their needs for independent living skills while they're also assisting or working towards the need for permanent family connections are more likely to help young people achieve self-sufficiency as they get older. And going back to the research again, many areas of the research, and again, I can send out this research, strongly suggests like young people leaving care will reconnect with their family in some way at some point after leaving care, even if they don't again reside with family at home on a long-term basis. This makes it essential that workers and carers prepare young people for this while in care and support them in negotiating family relationships before they leave care. Without this, young people are left alone to reconnect these relationships without the emotional and material supports that the care system can offer, and are absolutely crucial for young people. To not know how to go about that can obviously damage those relationships further or bring about further trauma for a young person. And CREATE are very much aware of this and have developed a resource around that, which I'll get to in a moment. So we spoke about Next Step before, and again, that age group of 15 to 25 for when a young person can access Next Step. This is just a bit of a kind of summary about what they can provide. So you can get into, if you go through the website, which I've included up there, which is nextstepplus.com.au. There's also a phone number on their website. So if you type into a search engine Next Step Plus, again, it will come straight up with a lot more information. It's really about how to connect young people with services and supports to tackle some of those areas that we spoke about previously, about accommodation, tertiary education, employment, how to work through some of those challenges, and also it can be around counselling. It's quite broad there. It's quite a good service. I've spoken to a number of carers that have utilised that and provided really good feedback. They're often reviewing that feedback. So if you provide them with information around the service about how you're finding it and you feel as though there's a gap there with something on their website or as part of their service, do let them know that, because they're certainly looking at that and being quite careful to ensure that the feedback that is being provided is taken on board. You may not be able to see this depending on the size of your screen that you're using. These are some of the resources that Create have got on their website, which I really wanted to give a plug to because they're such great resources. The one on the left-hand side is it provides tips for overcoming barriers to participation. So I spoke before about where there might be conversations that you're having with young people and you're having some difficulty in engaging them in conversations about a whole range of different topics, or whatever it is that you're having some issue around, whether it be you, the young person, or both. That resource is there, which again, if you email me, I'll send you the full version of that so that you can see it. I can't even read the headings there. So I'll certainly send that out, which is an excellent resource. And the one on the right-hand side is about reconnecting with family in a safe way. Going back to that point a moment ago from Create, finding that a lot of young people will go back and reconnect with family once they transition. That resource it provides 8 points about how to do that, or how young people can do that in a safe way. So it's tips for young people from young people that have gone through that. So yeah, a great resource there. And sometimes obviously from young people, it's going to come across better if you're connecting with young people from young people. So Create, identifying that, have developed that resource there. There's heaps of others as well. There's probably 5 or 6 that I haven't provided that are on equal par with these two, but they're 2 of the ones that going through I thought are absolutely critical to mention within this condensed version. And these are some of the others. I've just provided summaries for these. The 2 on the left-hand side, one of them is called Sortly, which you may have heard of, which is sorting out your life. It's a free mobile app download for mobiles, or I think it works on computers as well. It's really designed, again, for young people, and it's been designed by young people. So it includes a step-by-step guide for navigating some of the life challenges that young people will go through, such as finding a place to live, looking after your health, managing money, finding a job, doing some training, understanding legal rights, some of those things we mentioned earlier, but a whole range of additional things as well. The one on the left-hand side at the bottom is about Go Your Own Way. It's a leaving care information kit. So this is a resource for young people, again, aged 15, where this process really primarily begins, who are looking at starting to develop a bit of a plan. It's filled with resources and information, the planning process that can provide caseworkers, young people and carers with information that they need to assist that young person through that transition. On the top right-hand side, there's a departmental resource there. They've got some great ones within the Child Safety Practice Manual. So there's a participation strategy there, which again, I can send out more information around. And the one on the bottom right-hand side is their colouring books that have been provided. And really, that's about mindfulness. So it has a bit of a tagline there: leaving care to live independently can be a positive experience if you have access to the right information and support. It's important to pause, reflect, and take care of yourself and be mindful amidst that journey. So there again, some of the additional resources that I can provide more information around if you're interested. And this is just a final slide, and just with our details in terms of who we are, where we are, and how to contact us. So we do have a general number, which is 073256 6166. Some of you would have accessed us previously. We've got a general email as well, which is admin@qfkc.com.au. My email was at the very, very beginning. We've got another case officer, Jodie Baird, who's located in Townsville, to provide us with greater coverage throughout the state. And each of the case officers through QFKC each manage a region. We're not a very, very big team. So certainly there's a lot of work there. But for these areas like T2A and for any other that we provide training on, regardless of how big or short the module is, it's a really important area for us around training. So if anyone can look back at this, whether it be providing chat in a moment, which we'll get to, or as you've gone through this, if you think there's something that needs to be added, please email me and let me know. I'm very open to feedback about things that I may have missed. I appreciate that carers, agency workers, departmental staff, or anyone else that's going through this may have actually worked with a young person, and that young person may have provided advice about what they think is important for them. Please let me know. It's really an area of passion, this one, for me. So I want to make sure that if there's things that need to be included, that they're absolutely in there. So thank you all very much. Very, very short, quick snapshot at T2A, how we've got here, some of the name changes and the reasons around that, some of the roles and responsibilities that are covered within it, and some of the supports. I think for me, the support area is a great one. There's been a lot of research that's been put out from a whole range of different organisations in relation to this, realising how important it is. And I think, you know, one of the real crucial takeaway messages from this is including the young person in their planning, and also keeping an eye out for changes in this space. You know, we spoke about the fortnightly caring allowance being provided to approved carers for a young person up until they turn 19, regardless of educational status. That's a really important change. And the other one around home stretch and the department providing support until young people turn 21 more actively and directly is crucial as well. And for me, that's going to be something that I'm very much going to keep an eagle eye on to see how that's going to look. There's a comment there which we'll go through now. I'll actually open up the chat. I think there's a comment there which I'll look at immediately. So a comment from Carissa. So there's some increases in timeframes for eligibility for TILA. So young people have 12 weeks rather than 6 weeks to apply when approaching the time of formally leaving care. And if they've been in care after the age of 15 for at least a continuous period of 6 months, they are also eligible to apply. Thanks, Carissa. That's great to know. So that's 12 weeks rather than 6 weeks. So that's another important takeaway message. We'll update that within this to ensure that that's there. I think really, again, that goes back to what we spoke about before about needing to be flexible for young people. And I think doubling the time frame certainly, is a step towards doing that. If anyone's got any questions or comments, the chat tab is open there. I've got that to my right-hand side and can see that. If anyone would like to ask any questions, provide any feedback, please feel free to do so. We've got about 5 or so minutes there for any questions or comments. Can't see anyone typing yet. If there aren't any, but you've got anything that you'd like to raise in regards to a specific issue that you've got, please email me directly or make contact with me directly. I can go through and talk to you about that in much greater detail, and we can really unpack that and work out what's going on there and where we need to go moving forwards. But any general questions, please let me know if you've got the chat tab open. I'll put something in there, so hopefully it will pop up. So I've just put a comment in there, guys. Hopefully on your screen, I'm not sure how it's displaying, but at the very top of your screen, there should be a chat. There we've got one there. From Michelle. Hi, Danny, could you please send through the correct flyers? Absolutely, Michelle, I'll send those through to you. I've got your email address, so that's easy for me. Absolutely, I can do that. I'll have a conversation with you prior to work out which ones that are there. No worries at all, thank you. Any other comments or questions, guys? We've still got a few minutes there if anyone would like to ask anything. No, I think that's everything. I'll leave that there in case someone thinks of something. Look, again, thank you all very much for this. This was my first ever webinar, so some early nerves at the beginning and some tech issues, but we've worked through those. So I just want to thank you all very much for your participation in this, and obviously the time that you've taken out of your day. I know everyone's very, very busy at the current time to go through it. Thank you all for your messages there of support. I appreciate that. If you think of anything, again, that has come up as part of this that you want more information about, or something that you thought of afterwards, please let me know. And as Carita has also mentioned, there a PDF copy of the slides will be available on our website alongside the recording of this webinar. So this will go online in a few days or so. So if you've missed something and you want to go back through it and have a look, and again, as you're going through it, if you think of anything, please let me know. Make direct contact with me and I'll help you out in relation to that. So thank you all very much. Thank you.